So one of the things you're going to notice in this meeting is that we have really outstanding thought leaders who are completely outside of the field of reproductive sciences and women's health. And our first speaker this morning, Lee Hood, is one of them. And some of you may recall who attended our first summit 3 years ago that Lee was actually here and he gave a terrific talk about really the future of women's health. Lee has a memory, personal memory of the past, much longer than many of us, but Lee also has a vision for the future that far exceeds what many of us can envision. Lee Hood is the Senior Vice President and Chief Scientific Officer of Providence St. Joseph Health and co-founder of the Institute for Systems Biology in Seattle. Lee is also an elected member of all 3 National Academy of Medicine, Sciences, and Engineering. Lee has really brought scientific wellness to the forefront of our contemporary healthcare system. And recently, he pioneered the 1 million patient genome phenome project for Providence St. Joseph Health. So Lee was our guest 3 years ago, and Lee is going to give us an update with our thoughts today. Lee, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It's certainly a pleasure to be here. I am going to talk about medicine in the future, and I'll warn you that it is a general talk that will include the possibility of transforming all of the fields of medicine. I'm going to talk about a project called Beyond the Human Genome, and it is all about the science of wellness and about the science of prevention. I've created a new institute called Genome Health that's going to drive and direct this. And this is going to be a very general talk about what it's about. My colleague Nathan Price tomorrow will talk about some of the specific applications of these ideas to pregnancy. So what do we mean by Beyond the Human Genome Project? Well, the first genome project, of course, took 13 years to sequence 1 genome. We propose to take 10 years to sequence 1 million genomes and to analyze, in a deep sense, their longitudinal phenomes. So an enormous amount of data will be generated. We plan to and have approached the government for $10 billion to carry out this program, which is the next step of the first human genome project. And as I said, Genome Health is what this is all about. As all of you know, the genome is the order of DNA subunits and the 23 pairs of chromosomes, and the sequence of the human genome essentially has decoded the source code of human life. The phenome, on the other hand, is a conjunction of 3 different things: your genome, your lifestyle, and your environment. And they together at a given point in time give you your phenome across your life. There'll be 1 million, billions, an infinite number of different phenomes, okay? We'll see if, okay. And an infinite number of phenomes, and we can analyze these phenomes at any given point in time by looking at blood analytes in the gut microbiome, digital health, and other kinds of things that we're going to talk about. Now, the essence of the vision that's driving this is we're going to be able to assess and optimize the health trajectory of each individual and do it for body and brain health. And of course, that leads to 3 different phases: a wellness phase, a transition phase, and a disease phase. The transitions, wellness to disease, often occur years before clinical signs appear. And it's when the disease is at its simplest. So the conceptual idea is to be able to identify biomarkers that mark the earliest transition and use them to identify the appropriate therapy for reversing the disease before it ever manifests itself. And of course, the typical person will go through this cycle many times before they get to the end. And they often get to the end with serious compromises in either body health or brain health or both. What we propose to do in the future is reverse each of those transitions and bring you back to wellness throughout your entire life so that you'll move into your 80s and 90s and even 100s, mentally acute, physically well, and so forth. This is a wonderful example of what I've called P4 medicine: predictive, preventive, personalized, and participatory. The first three Ps are exemplified beautifully here: prediction, prevention, and personalization, and they're all about science. And I'll tell you, we know how to do that science. The fourth P, participatory: how do we get patients to accept the new actionable possibilities that can transform their health? How do we persuade physicians to use these? How do we convince healthcare leaders to be involved, and the regulatory and et cetera? How do we persuade people that this is a tipping point for the largest paradigm change ever in health? And I'd argue this is the most important project that's ongoing now in precision population health. So we have two wonderful proof of principle for this. We set a company up that lasted for 4 years to bring scientific wellness to 5,000 clients, and we did their genome and their longitudinal phenomes. And these data have absolutely transformed our understanding of the whole idea of wellness and healthy aging, as you'll see in a moment. We're collaborating with a company called Posit, started by Michael Merzenich, a well-known neurophysiologist who was in the academy, has won the national, the Kevley Medal for proving that the brain is flexible even up into our 80s, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. In the Aravale population, we assess the trajectory, the health trajectory of individuals by doing their genome, clinical chemistries in labs that included proteins, metabolites, and the microbiome. We did each of those twice a year, and then we used a Fitbit for digital tracking and other devices to give information. And these collectively could be integrated together in ways that pointed to more than 200 actionable possibilities for wellness that, if acted upon, allowed an individual to improve their wellness and or avoid disease. And this was a real revolution in medicine. It led to the concept, for example, of quantitative or scientific wellness, where we were able to show in this population thousands of correlations among the 6 different data types. And these led us to the literature and to the actionable possibilities that we used in unique lists for each individual. We were able to use the fact that the populations extended from 21 to 93 to bin the individuals and demonstrate as you aged in more or less a linear fashion, you lost the capacity to control the expression of your blood analytes. And from this observation, we developed an algorithm to define your biological age, the age your body says you are, as opposed to the age your birthday says you are. Obviously, the younger you are with respect to your chronologic age, the healthier you're aging. We demonstrated in Aravale on average that individuals lost 4 to 6 years of biological age over the 4-year period they were employed in the program. A striking demonstration of, if not reversing aging, we certainly have the capacity to slow it. And healthy aging is a metric for wellness we're going to use to optimize healthy aging. And Nathan Price will probably talk about this. So those are all about the science of wellness. So let's talk about the kinds of prevention that come out. So one is we were able to use 54 polygenic scores to assign to the 5,000 individuals genetic risk in 5 bins from very low to very high. And we demonstrated in one case, and strikingly, the risk for LDL cholesterol, a proxy for heart disease, that individuals at the high risk end that had high cholesterol could only bring it down with statins, whereas individuals with low risk with high cholesterol, it came down easily with diet and exercise and the like. So our contention is it's important to know genetic risks, because one will end up treating them differently, high and low, and two, if you're high risk, will follow you closely to get the earliest transition and reverse it before it becomes manifest as a disease. And the final preventive observation was the observation that we saw 67 wellness to disease transitions across the 4 years of Aravale, where they went to many different types of chronic disease. We looked at 10 of those that transitioned to cancer, and the bloods prior to their clinical diagnosis, and demonstrated for each of those 10 that there were outlier proteins in some cases that marked the transition 4 or 5 years before the clinical diagnosis. So that validated the idea we can get good biomarkers and we can use them then to begin thinking about prevention. And where we've come the furthest is with Alzheimer's. And I'll give you some of the things we've learned. We've been able to use blood analytes to stratify Alzheimer's into 6 different subtypes. We've used the family genetic risk, and I'll talk about that in just a moment, to identify individuals should be treated preventively. Why women are at greater risk than men, we still don't completely understand. And we've begun to demonstrate beautifully that a new approach to Alzheimer's, not focused on amyloid in the slightest, namely a multimodal approach that deals with lifestyle and exercise and sleep, and optimizing the blood biochemistry and the brain biochemistry makes an enormous difference for prevention and for reversal of the disease. We're setting up now a large clinical trial with very high-risk individuals to be able to get the biomarkers that mark the earliest transition, and we predict that will be more than 15 years prior to clinical diagnosis. We'll then be able to use these multimodal therapies to reverse them and ensure that people never transition into Alzheimer's. And we've used multimodal therapies in a very spotty way so far to demonstrate even for early clinical Alzheimer's, we can do some remarkable reversals. We see scaling this, and we see applying it to other neurologic diseases, and it's a model of how we're going to deal with chronic diseases. And to give you an idea of the power of genetics, here is a 5-generation family we're studying where we've determined the complete amino acid sequence of the lower members, 3 lower members of this family tree. And it's rampant with Alzheimer's, as indicated by red in the circles or squares that refers to ApoE4, or within the circles or squares, colors that refer to your risk from polygenic scores to Alzheimer's. And I won't go into the details, but to say 2 important things. One, from this family analysis, we can predict far more accurately your potential progressive history. And number 2, we can begin to segregate beautifully the 25 biomarkers in the polygenic scores and see and determine A, their relative risk, and B, the genes they lie adjacent to, so we can test those for mechanistic implications. So family studies tell you far more about the individual than the study of an individual. And in the million-person project, family studies are going to be really important. Michael Merzenich has 40 measurements that can look at 25 different cognitive features. And he's demonstrated, fascinatingly enough, that if you follow the trajectory for cognition for normal individuals, we reach a maximum in the mid-30s and decay thereafter. He's demonstrated with digital management of brain disease that he can take 10 80-year-olds in a clinical trial and elevate them to what they would have expected to have been in their mid-30s. So for all of us, there's hope we can regain lost cognitive function. And we can use that to manage wellness or disease. And he's carried out more than 250 clinical trials on 10,000 individuals with this, looking at both well and disease types of individuals. The microbiome is another key factor in body and brain health. Diversity is the essence of what we know now is key for health. And we can actually, we've demonstrated that we can measure the microbiome diversity from 11 blood metabolites that gives us the ability retrospectively to look at any set of blood samples and assess what the microbiome looked like in those. Extremely valuable approach. But we have much to learn about the microbiome. But one recent study we had in Nature Biotechnology was a study of 9,000 individuals in 60s through 80s. And we looked at the microbiome and were able to demonstrate in healthy individuals 2 fundamental changes occurred by the time they were in their 80s with regard to the microbiome. One, they lost the core taxa that you see in the 20s and 30s. And 2, each healthy individual diversified in a unique manner that demonstrated there was a selection for needs reflecting probably genetic and environmental differences. What we also demonstrated is in unhealthy individuals in their 80s, they neither lost their core microbiome nor did they differentiate individually. And if you compared healthy and unhealthy individuals in their 80s, you could show over a 4-year period, the unhealthy individuals were 4 times as likely to die. So it's intriguing to think we'll be able to manipulate the microbiome and optimize the healthy phenotype for individuals in a routine manner in the future. So I've given you a sense of the science of wellness for body and brain health, and that includes scientific wellness and the actionable possibilities that we know. It includes approach to optimizing healthy aging, which uses the metabolic makeup of the basic algorithm for biological age to optimize not only your global biological health, but your organ biological health, as Nathan will probably discuss. We can optimize cognitive brain health. We're going to learn how to optimize the gut microbiome. We've shown recently, for example, the gut microbiome has an absolutely profound impact on the effect of statins, both in lowering cholesterol and in causing side effects. So it's going to be key then to integrate body, brain, and gut microbiome to understand health in really effective way. What about science of prevention? Well, polygenic scores we've talked about. The ability to see the early wellness to disease transitions and reverse them, we've talked about. Digital brain analysis and the reversal of cognitive loss is really key, and the power of family genetic analysis prevention is going to be absolutely critical. Here are a list of 13 papers over the last 4 or 5 years that have come out of largely the airfail population, and they demonstrate unequivocally the power of the science of wellness and prevention. So what about this program I've talked about beyond the Human Genome Project? Where exactly are we today? Well, we're going to do genome-phenome analyses, but we'll add to what we did for Airveil the brain analyses. We'll extend the blood analyses enormously, moving from 500 to 3,000 proteins. We'll include sequencing of white cells and look at the epigenetics of cell-free DNA and white blood cells. We're going to include in our analyses the electronic health records for every single patient, and they'll be a part of the integrative analysis we'll do, as well as the social determinants of health and outcomes for the patients. They will all be integrated together to give us a database that will point to, I would predict, 10,000 new actionable possibilities that only can be delivered by AI because of the bewildering complexity of opportunities they will present medicine with. So how do we plan to implement this? We're going to do 1 million analyses over 10 years, it should be. It's a typo here. And we have 6 key partners for this analysis. The Guardian Research Network is an entity that has a relationship with 100 hospitals and 30 million patients in the South and Southeast. They've learned how to extract electronic health records, both structured and unstructured, including doctor's notes and things like that, from all of the 30 million patients, and to deliver them in a manner that's readily digestible by the integrative approaches we'll use for all of the other types of data. They've consented these patients so we can readily reach out to them to be a part of the 1 million-person project. And they extend in the South and Southeast across populations of all ethnic relationships. And we will analyze those ethnic and poverty relationships in a proportion that's roughly equivalent to that we see in the United States. POSIT will help us carry out brain health and manage early stage brain disease. ISB is going to be a fundamental part of this in technology, in computation. For example, we'll have digital twins for a whole series of the diseases that give us a new integrative approach to converting correlations into causal results. And we'll negotiate with a company spun out recently from ISB, Bioanalytica, that will carry out the generation of data for us. And we've interacted with Deloitte and more recently with Google, and they're going to put major resources and efforts into this program. So we'll get started immediately, even if we have to wait a year or so for the federal monies to come in. We're exploring federal partnerships. NIH, DOE, and VA all have expressed an interest in collaborating with us. And we have an outstanding scientific advisory board. Jeff Wilkie, number 2 at Amazon, superb in scaling in AI. Ralph Snyderman, who's a leading clinician, probably the father of academic clinical personalized medicine. Victor Zhao, president of the National Academy of Medicine. Roger Perlmutter, former number 2 at Merck and a wonderful advisor on the on pharma. George Church is actually helping me with many different parts of this project and so forth. What is unique about what we're doing? How are we different from the British Biobank or from the program All of Us or a number of efforts that are exploding? And there are many unique features. We are the only one carrying out longitudinal phenome analysis for body, brain, and microbiome, and analyzing and integrating genome, electronic health records, phenome, longitudinal determinants of health and outcomes. We're going to bring thousands of new actionability delivered by AI. We're going to feed the data of individuals into a hyperscale AI that has itself absorbed virtually all of PubMed, so one can make correlations way beyond those ever imagined before. And these are not going to be easy to translate into causative factors, but I think we have the wherewithal to do it. We'll include industrial and academics to allow us to convert the new knowledge we gain and transfer it to society. We're going to have biomarkers for every major drug that will tell you who will respond to it and who won't, and that will really be transformational. And we're going to employ the electronic health records to select the 4 major diseases with regard to cost and morbidity: cancer, cardiovascular, diabetes, and neurodegenerative, selecting populations that we can look at in very large scale in the million-person project to subtype each of these major chronic diseases into probably 30 or 40 different subtypes for some, and to find their earliest transition points for reversal. And we're going to create an accelerator incubator that will take the vast knowledge gained, convert it into intellectual property, and create spin-outs and the licensing of IP to society. So what about this idea of taking a big population like diabetes and trying to convert it into something that's manageable? The typical diabetic drug, if we're lucky, will get 10 to 15% responders. So what this means is we have to be able to take diabetes and divide it into its different subtypes so we can target each subtype for a therapy that will give us a 90% or better response. And of course, this is a totally new paradigm in drug discovery and drug treatment. And the interesting question for us is, who are going to be the daring pharma that will embrace the future rather than the past? Another point is, if you look at the 10 most commonly used drugs in the US, costing $600 billion a year, less than 10% of the patients respond appropriately. And if we can get biomarkers that will tell pharma just which patients can respond, we can change the dimension of the cost in a staggering kind of manner in the future. We see spinning off verticals, that is, potential spin-off companies that will go into the accelerator and incubator and become an independent company for type 2 diabetes. This is our first initial major focus. And I'll just say we can select easily millions of patients from Guardian Research Network and do retrospective studies with electronic health records that will give us enormous clues into stratification of the 4 major transitions that occur from wellness to irreversible chronic diabetes. But we can do it for cardiovascular and cancer and autoimmune and especially, obviously, rare diseases, Mendelian recessives. We could talk about each of these, but brain health and Alzheimer's is obviously going to be really a key point. So we're going to be creating immediately IP and getting this started because of our short-term partners, Deloitte and Google, that will give us both financial resources and technical resources to begin these trials along the lines that I've outlined immediately. And the first one, as I said, looking at the 4 stages of diabetes. A second, we're well into ranging, is acute myelogenous leukemia. It's a fascinating disease for many reasons. And then we'll be doing long COVID, and our argument that most of the symptoms of long COVID come from autoimmune phenomena, and we have powerful ways for assessing at any given blood draw, any given point in time along the trajectory of a COVID patient, exactly the status of their immune system. And we have longer term risks, the Alzheimer's studies, where we'll look at those at an appropriate age and a very high degree of risk for their transitions to get the biomarker that will trigger all the things that we've talked about. And aging, one of the things we're really interested in, as well as using lifestyle and exercise and all of those things and optimizing the blood chemistry, there are very powerful drugs that appear to slow aging, such as rapamycin, that I think will make a real difference. So what is this going to create for other institutions that may wish to follow us? We'll create a data ecosystem unparalleled before in the past, open to innovation and open to all. We'll create a biobank that has samples from the 1 million people for discovery and hypothesis tested. We're already well along in creating computational platforms for the education of patients and physicians and the consenting of patients, and we'll automate the computing platforms for every aspect of data generation. We're going to create strategies for dealing with minorities and the economic disadvantaged. We'll automate fully the analyses of this vast amount of data in with Google, feed it into their hyperscale AI, DeepMind. And we'll have a network of academic and industrial partners that will help us both move forward various objectives. I mean, they're really key objectives. Pregnancy is one, early childhood is another, and we're seeking partners for all of that. And I'll say more about that in just a second. And then finally, we have to create strategies to deal with the appropriate security. And with Google, we're really in good shape in thinking about that. The value propositions, we're going to create and validate the science of wellness and healthy aging for body and brain. It's going to be a really effective way to approach diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll stratify and create transitions for really all of the major chronic diseases, starting with the first 4 major. Thousands of new actionable possibilities. We'll transfer healthcare from a disease-oriented entity to a wellness-driven entity. And innovation, new companies, jobs, taxes, all the things the government is going to like. It'll catalyze a value-based medicine where the focus is on keeping populations healthy rather than how many times the doctor touches the patient. And obviously this will lead to a world leadership in science and technology for medicine, just as the first Genome project led to us. And my last comment is, together with Yoel Sadowski, we're going to be setting up a pioneering 200 program for pregnant women that will take many of the approaches that we've talked about here, follow them across that limited 9-month trajectory, and we'll learn more about pregnancy in that period of time than we've known in the last 50 years. So I think the really interesting question is, how do we persuade the healthcare system to change? People are conservative. They don't want to change what they do. They're a little afraid of new kinds of ideas. But we are at a tipping point for this transformation to wellness and prevention. And I think the bold institutions that will follow this opportunity will position themselves in with unique opportunities for the future of medicine over the next 10 to 20 to 30 years. This is going to happen. The only question is when and how long it's going to take you to become a part of it. Thank you.